The Galactic Assembly had existed for 12,000 years. 17 different alien species had built it together. They traded with each other. They shared technology. They solved problems through talking, not fighting. War was something they read about in old history books. No one alive had ever seen a real battle. Then the humans arrived. Ambassador. Catherine Cole stepped into the great chamber on a warm Tuesday morning by Earth's calendar. She was 53 years old, with brown hair turning gray at the edges and calm green eyes that missed nothing. She had spent 30 years learning how to talk to difficult people. Nothing had prepared her for this. The chamber was enormous. 17 different sections rose up around a central platform, each designed for a different species. Some sections were filled with water. Others were kept at temperatures that would kill a human in minutes. The air smelled strange, like a mix of flowers and rust and something Catherine could not name. High Chancellor Vextel watched her from the central platform. He was tall, nearly 8 feet, with scales that shifted color when the light hit them. He had 6 arms and eyes that wrapped around his head, allowing him to see in all directions at once. His species, the Marathi, had founded the assembly long before humans learned to make fire. Catherine walked to the speaking circle and bowed. She had practiced this moment 1,000 times. She knew that every species in this room saw her as a predator. Her eyes faced forward, like a hunter. Her ancestors had eaten meat. She showed her teeth when she smiled, which most species here considered a threat display. She would have to be very careful. Honored Assembly, Catherine said. I am Ambassador Catherine Cole of Earth. My species comes in peace. We seek only friendship and trade. The translation systems hummed. Her words echoed in 17 languages across the chamber. Vextel leaned forward. Your species is young, Ambassador. You have been traveling between stars for less than 200 years. We do not accept new members until they have proven stable for at least 500 years. Catherine nodded. She had expected this. We understand, Chancellor. Perhaps we could begin as observers. A chance to show our good intentions. A small alien in the water section raised a webbed hand. This was Delegate Soren of the Velith. His species looked something like frogs, with large eyes and smooth skin that changed color with emotion. Right now, his skin was pale yellow, which Catherine had learned meant fear. I have studied your history, Soren said. Your species has been at war with itself since you first built cities. You have weapons that could destroy your entire planet. You hunt and eat other creatures. How can we trust such beings? Catherine kept her face calm. We know our past, Delegate, but we have changed. We united our world. We came here seeking friendship, not conquest. Words, Vextel said. Anyone can speak words. Your species will be watched, Ambassador. Very closely. The Assembly voted to grant humanity observer status. They were given a small station at the edge of Assembly space, far from the important worlds. They could trade only certain goods. They could not share certain technologies. Cameras and sensors watched them constantly. Catherine accepted all of it with a polite smile. That night, she sent a message to Admiral Patricia Quinn back on Earth. Quinn was 60 years old. With short gray hair and the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from stone, she had commanded fleets, won battles, and spent the last decade preparing for this moment. They are afraid of us, Catherine reported. Not because of anything we have done, because of what we are. Quinn nodded slowly. Predators among prey. We knew this might happen. What do? Exactly what you are doing. Smile. Cooperate. Prove them wrong. One day at a time. For 11 years, humanity followed this plan. Human traders obeyed every rule. Human scientists shared their discoveries freely. Human engineers helped fix broken stations and responded to natural disasters. Slowly, some assembly species began to change their opinions. The Falari were the first to speak up for humanity. They were a feline species, with fur and claws and forward-facing eyes like humans. They understood what it meant to evolve as a predator. Delegate Kiranash, a Falari, with orange and black stripes, argued before the assembly. The humans have proven themselves. They follow our laws. They help our people. They deserve a chance. The vote to upgrade humanity's status failed, but it was close. Then everything changed. The Dominion arrived without warning. Their ships appeared at the edge of assembly space, hundreds of them, each one bristling with weapons. They were commanded by a species called the Vreth. Tall creatures with gray skin and 4 arms built for combat. Their message was simple. Surrender everything or be destroyed. Vexel called an emergency meeting. The chamber that usually buzzed with trade agreements and minor disputes was now silent with terror. The Marathi had no real military. Neither did the Velith, the Falari, or any other assembly species. They had forgotten how to fight. They had never needed to know. We must negotiate, Vexel declared. Offer them whatever they want. Territory, resources, tribute. They do not negotiate, Soren said. His skin was almost white now. They have destroyed 12 civilizations. They take everything and kill everyone. Catherine Cole rose from her seat in the back of the chamber. She was 64 now, her hair fully gray, but her eyes were still sharp. May I speak? She asked. Vexel made an impatient gesture with 3 of his arms. Humans have no vote here. You are observers only. I am not asking to vote. I am asking to help. The chamber went quiet. The Falari delegate leaned forward with interest. The Marathi exchanged confused looks. Help, Vexel said. You have 1 small station. A handful of ships. What help could you possibly offer against 800 warships? Catherine smiled. It was not her diplomatic smile. It was something older, something that spoke of ancient campfires and wolves circling in the darkness. Chancellor, she said, you have spent 11 years assuming we showed you everything we have. She walked to the central platform, ignoring the guards who moved to stop her. Something in her expression made them hesitate. He looked at us and saw predators. You were right, but you made a mistake. You thought that meant we were dangerous to you? She turned to face the entire assembly. We are not your enemies. We never were. But we are very, very good at destroying things that threaten the people we care about. Catherine pressed a button on her wrist communicator. Admiral Quinn, please send the files. Every display screen in the chamber lit up with images. Ships. Thousands of ships. Carriers and battleships and fighters, all marked with Earth's flag. Weapons systems that made the assembly's technology look like children's toys. Military bases on dozens of worlds that the assembly had never known existed. 47 colony worlds, Catherine said. 300 outposts. 19 billion people. In a military that has been preparing for war since the day we first reached the stars. Vexel's scales had gone pale. You lied to us. We showed you what you needed to see. You were not ready for the truth. Catherine's voice softened. But you are ready now. The Dominion is coming to destroy everything you have built. We can stop them. All we need is your permission. The chamber erupted in chaos. Some delegates shouted in anger. Others called out questions. A few simply sat in stunned silence. But Catherine Cole stood calm at the center of it all, waiting for the assembly to decide whether they would trust the monsters they had feared for 11 years. The vote would take 2 days. The debates would be fierce, but in the end, there was only one choice. The wolves had offered to protect the sheep, and the sheep, for the first time in 12,000 years, said yes. Admiral Patricia Quinn arrived at the assembly station 3 days after the vote. She came aboard a shuttle because she wanted to walk into the meeting room like a normal person, not descend from orbit like a conqueror. Small gestures mattered in diplomacy. Catherine had taught her that the meeting room was small by assembly standards, just large enough for a dozen beings. Vexel sat at the head of the table with his senior advisors. Delegate Kiranash represented the Falari. Soren represented the Velith. Several other species had sent their most important officials. Quinn walked in wearing her dress uniform, which was dark blue with silver trim. Commander Nathan Hayes followed behind her, a tall man in his 40s with a serious face and kind eyes. Lieutenant Daniel Marsh came last, young and nervous, but trying not to show it. Thank you for seeing us, Quinn said as she took her seat. Before we begin, I want to explain something. We kept our military secret not because we planned to use it against you. We kept it secret because we knew you would never trust us if you saw it." "You were right," Vexel said coldly. "We would not have trusted you. We still do not." "Fair enough," Quinn nodded to Lieutenant Marsh, who activated a holographic display above the table. The image showed a map of human space. It was much, much larger than the assembly had ever imagined. 47 worlds glowed with population markers. Hundreds of smaller dots showed outposts, mining stations, and military bases. "This is what we actually control," Quinn said. "We settled these worlds over the past 2 centuries. We built defenses because we did not know what we might find out here. We hoped for friends. We prepared for enemies." Soren's skin had turned a shade of blue that meant confusion. "Why hide this? We would have W. Welcomed you as equals if we knew you were this powerful. Would you?" Catherine asked gently. "Or would you have been even more afraid? A species that lies about its numbers might be hiding an invasion fleet." No one answered. They all knew she was right. Quinn changed the display to show military assets. The numbers were staggering. 3,000 combat ships spread across 12 fleets, 2 million trained soldiers, weapons factories that could produce more equipment in a month than most assembly species owned in total. "The Dominion has approximately 800 ships," Quinn said. "Based on our intelligence, their technology is roughly equal to ours. They are not invincible. They can be beaten. At what cost?" Vexel asked. "High, very high." Quinn did not look away from his eyes. "We estimate we will lose between 40 and 60% of the forces we commit. Thousands of ships. Hundreds of thousands of lives." The room went silent. The assembly species had never thought about war in these terms. They could not imagine choosing to lose hundreds of thousands of people. "Why would you accept such losses?" Kieran Ash asked. "For species that treated you as criminals?" Commander Hayes spoke for the first time. "Because those are our friends on Veleth Prime, our trading partners on Filari stations. People we have known for 11 years. We do not abandon our friends." "But we are not your friends," Soren said quietly. "We feared you. We restricted you. We treated you badly." "Yes," Hayes agreed. "We did. And we forgive you." The simple statement hung in the air. The assembly delegates did not know what to say. Forgiveness was not something they had expected from predators. Quinn brought up a tactical display showing the threshold. The narrow passage of space between 2 neutron stars that served as the main entry point to assembly territory. "This is where we will make our first stand. The geography is good for defense. We can force them to come at us in small numbers." "How long until they arrive?" Vexel asked. 3 weeks. "We need to move our fleets into position immediately." "With your permission." The debate that followed lasted 8 hours. Some delegates worried about giving humans control of their space. Others questioned whether humanity really intended to help or was simply looking for an excuse to take over. A few suggested surrendering to the Dominion instead. Lieutenant Marsh sat quietly through most of it. He was 26 years old, the youngest person in the room by decades. He had joined the military because his grandfather had told him stories about Earth's wars, about soldiers who fought for things bigger than themselves. Near the end of the debate, Delegate Soren turned to him directly. "You are young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Why would you risk it for strangers?" Marsh thought about the question carefully before answering. "My grandfather fought in a war on Earth when he was my age. He said the worst part was not the fighting. The worst part was knowing that innocent people were dying because no one was willing to protect them. He told me that the measure of a civilization is not how it treats its friends, but how it treats those who need help." He paused, aware that everyone was watching him. "You need help. We can provide it. That is all the reason I require." Soren's skin turned a color Marsh had never seen before, something between green and gold. Catherine later told him it meant deep respect. The final vote was unanimous. The Assembly granted humanity permission to deploy its fleets through their space. Quinn sent a single encrypted message to Earth. "Operation Guardian is active. All fleets begin deployment." Across human space, The military machine that had been built over 2 centuries began to move. Shipyards increased production to maximum capacity. Reserve units received activation orders. Supply convoys launched from 100 different worlds. On Earth, families said goodbye to soldiers they might never see again. Mothers hugged sons. Fathers shook hands with daughters. Lovers made promises they hoped they could keep. Commander Hayes called his daughter from the assembly station. She was 15, living with her aunt while he served. "I might not be able to call for a while," he told her. "There is something I have to do." "Is it dangerous?" she asked. "Yes. Are you scared?" Hayes looked out the window at the stars, thinking about the ships that were already moving toward the threshold. "A little, but I am more afraid of what happens if we do not try. I love you, Dad." "I love you too, sweetheart. I will come home if I can." He ended the call and stood in the darkness for a long time. Then he went to the command center to begin planning the defense. 3 weeks later, the first human fleet arrived at the threshold. 200 ships arranged in perfect formation, weapons charged and ready. Admiral Quinn commanded from the carrier Washington, her flagship. The Dominion fleet appeared on sensors the next morning. 800 ships, exactly as predicted. They approached in a massive wedge formation. Confidence visible in every movement. Quinn opened a communication channel to the enemy commander. "This is Admiral Patricia Quinn of the Earth Defense Forces. You are approaching territory protected by the Galactic Assembly and the Human Colonial Alliance. I am asking you to turn around." The Vreth commander appeared on her screen. He was huge, with gray skin and scars covering half his face. His name was Kethphos, and he had destroyed civilizations. He laughed, a harsh sound like rocks grinding together. "You have 200 ships. I have 800. Your assembly allies have fled. You cannot hope to win." "Probably not," Quinn agreed. "But that is not the point." "Then what is?" "The point is that you are going to pay for every piece of space you take. By the time you get past us, you will have half the ships you started with. And there are 11 more fleets waiting behind us." She leaned forward, and something in her eyes made Kethphos hesitate. "We have been fighting wars since before we had writing. We have killed millions of our own kind. We know death better than you ever will. Turn around now, or learn what humans can do when they have something to protect." Kethphos ended the communication. For a long moment, he stared at the tactical display, seeing the small human fleet blocking his path. Then he gave the order to attack, and the Battle of the Threshold began. The Battle of the Threshold lasted 18 hours. 18 hours of fire and death and desperate courage in the darkness between stars. Admiral Quinn watched from the command center of the Washington as the Dominion fleet approached. 800 ships against her 200? The numbers were impossible. Every officer in her fleet knew they were probably going to die. They came anyway. The first wave of Dominion ships hit the human line like a hammer against steel. Energy weapons lit up the void. Missiles streaked through space, leaving trails of exhaust. Ships exploded on both sides, crews dying in fire or vacuum, or the simple cold of Space Commander. Nathan Hayes commanded the destroyer Intrepid from the center of the line. His ship was small compared to the enemy battleships, but it was fast and heavily armed for its size. Hayes had been flying ships for 20 years. He knew exactly what his vessel could do. "Focus fire on the lead battleship," he ordered. "All weapons, continuous fire." The Intrepid shook as enemy weapons struck her shields. Warning lights flashed across the bridge. The ship groaned like a living thing in pain, shields at 60%. His tactical officer reported, "Keep firing." The lead battleship finally broke apart, its reactor going critical in a bloom of white light. But 2 more moved to take its place. Then 3. Then 6. Hayes looked at the tactical display and knew the truth. His ship was not going to survive this battle. He had accepted that possibility when he volunteered for this mission. What mattered now was making his death count. "All hands prepare for ramming speed," he announced over the ship's communication system. "It has been an honor serving with you." The Intrepid accelerated toward the largest enemy ship, a massive command cruiser. Enemy weapons tore into her hull. Compartments decompressed. Crew members died at their stations. Hayes stayed at his post, guiding his ship through the chaos. His last thought before impact was of his daughter, and the hope that she would understand why he had to do this. The Intrepid struck the enemy cruiser at full speed. Both ships disappeared in an explosion that could be seen from 1,000 miles away, across the battle line. Similar stories played out. Human pilots flew their damaged fighters into enemy vessels rather than eject. Human cruisers deliberately took killing shots meant for their carriers. Human soldiers, in the few boarding actions that occurred, fought with a ferocity that shocked the Vreth warriors. Lieutenant Daniel Marsh commanded a frigate called the Horizon. He was the youngest ship commander in the fleet. He was promoted because so many senior officers had already died. His ship was crippled in the 9th hour of battle. Engines destroyed. Weapons offline. Life support failing. The only thing still working was the reactor. Marsh looked at the tactical display and saw an enemy command ship nearby. If that ship survived, it would coordinate the next wave of attacks. Thousands of humans would die because of it. All hands abandon ship, Marsh ordered. Everyone to the escape pods. His crew looked at him with confusion. Sir, what about you? Someone has to steer this thing.
Marsh sat down in the pilot's chair.
Go. That is an order. The crew hesitated, then obeyed. Marsh watched the escape pods launch, carrying his people to safety. Then he turned his attention to the enemy ship. The Horizon still had enough power to move. Just barely. Marsh aimed the crippled frigate at the command ship and pushed the engines as hard as they would go. The enemy tried to shoot him down, but his ship was too close and moving too fast. In the final seconds, Marsh thought about his parents back on Earth, about the life he would never have, about the children who would grow up safe because of what he was about to do. The collision destroyed both ships. Instantly, Admiral Quinn heard about Hayes and Marsh and dozens of others as reports came in throughout the battle. Each death was a wound. Each sacrifice was a testament to what humans could do when they believed in something. By the 12th hour, her left arm was gone below the elbow. A piece of debris had torn through the Washington's bridge, killing 3 officers and wounding several more. Quinn refused to leave her post. She sat in her command chair, covered in blood, still giving orders. First Fleet status, she demanded. 62 ships remaining, Admiral. Most of them damaged. 62 ships out of 200. They had lost nearly 70% of their force. But the Dominion had lost even more. Enemy dead. 430 ships. More than half their fleet. Destroyed by a force less than a quarter of their size. Kethvos was still alive, his flagship battered but functional. He looked at the tactical display with something he had never felt before. Doubt. His species had evolved as predators, feared throughout their region of space. He had destroyed civilizations without breaking a sweat. But these humans were different. They fought like creatures defending their young with no regard for their own survival. They used tactics he had never seen, adapted to every move he made, and never, ever stopped fighting. Retreat, he ordered finally. Fall back and regroup. Surviving Dominion ships pulled away from the threshold. They had one, technically. The human fleet was shattered. The path to assembly space was open, but Kethvos knew the truth. He had lost this battle, not on points, but on will. The humans had broken something in his fleet that could not be repaired. His soldiers had seen the impossible. They had seen prey animals fight like predators, seen a smaller force tear them apart through sheer determination. Fear had entered the Dominion's heart. Admiral Quinn watched the enemy retreat and allowed herself a moment of relief. Then she opened a channel to the Second Fleet, which was waiting 2 days behind them. This is Quinn. We have held the threshold, but the enemy is still operational. They will try again. Admiral George Callahan's face appeared on her screen. He was a scholar of warfare, a man who had spent his career studying battles and never fighting one. Now he would get his chance. How bad? He asked. Bad. We lost 70%. Hayes is dead. Marsh is dead. A lot of good people are dead. Callahan nodded slowly. Did you learn anything useful? Quinn managed a tired smile. Everything. Their tactics, their weaknesses, their formation patterns. We know how they fight now. Use that. We will. Get your people to safety, Patricia. You have done enough. Quinn ended the communication and looked around her shattered bridge. The surviving crew was exhausted, wounded, grieving, but they were also proud. They had done something impossible. Set course for the nearest repair station, she ordered, and get me a status report on our wounded. As the Washington limped away from the threshold, the Second Fleet moved into position. Fresh ships, full crews. A commander who had studied everything the First Fleet had learned. Kethphos attacked again 3 days later. He expected easier prey. He was wrong. The Second Fleet fought differently than the First, where Quinn had been aggressive. Callahan was patient. He used the geography of the threshold, forcing the enemy to fight in narrow corridors, where their numbers meant nothing. The Dominion lost another 200 ships. Callahan lost 50. Then came the Third Fleet, then the Fourth. Each battle was slightly easier than the last, because each fleet learned from the ones before. By the time the Dominion reached the edge of assembly core space, it had fewer than 100 ships remaining. Kethphos was dead, killed when a coordinated human strike destroyed his flagship. The new commander, a young officer named Vethra, looked at what remained of her once mighty fleet and made a decision. She sent a message to the assembly. We wish to negotiate. The war was not over yet, but the impossible had happened. Humanity had held the line. 17 species would live because 23,000 humans had chosen to die. The galaxy would never be the same. The negotiations took place on a small human station called Haven. One of the original outposts that had existed before the assembly knew humanity's true strength. It seemed fitting somehow. This was where humans had first pretended to be harmless. Now it would be where they showed their mercy. Ambassador Catherine Cole led the human delegation. She was 64 years old, tired beyond words, and grieving for the 2 nephews she had lost in the fighting. One had died at the threshold with Commander Hayes. The other had been killed during the Fourth Fleet's final push. She would never see them again. But grief could wait. Peace could not. High Chancellor Vextel attended in person, something he had never done for any negotiation in his 300 years of life. He had watched the war from his chamber, seen the casualty reports, heard the recordings of human ships, dying to protect worlds that had treated them like dangerous animals. He did not know what to say to Catherine. He did not know how to thank someone for something that big. So he simply sat beside her at the table and waited for the enemy to arrive. Vethra came with 2 advisors. All that remained of the Dominion's leadership? She was young for a commander, barely 40 by Vreth standards. The war had aged her beyond her years. Her gray skin had turned almost white in places, and her forearms hung limp at her sides, as if she no longer had the strength to hold them up. We did not expect this, Vethra said when the formal greetings were complete. Our intelligence said the assembly had no military. No ability to fight. They do not, Catherine replied. We do. You are not members of the assembly. Why did you fight for them? Why did you sacrifice so many of your own people? Catherine thought about the question for a long moment. Through the station's windows, she could see the stars that humans had died to protect. Somewhere out there, drifting in the endless void, were the remains of her nephew's ships. Because they needed us, she said finally. Because we could help. Because we spent 11 years trying to prove that we were not monsters, and this was our chance to show who we really are. You lost 23,000 soldiers, dozens of ships, resources that took decades to build. For species that feared you, for people who called you predators and kept you at the edge of their space. Vethra shook her head slowly. I do not understand your kind. No, Catherine agreed. You do not. And honestly, sometimes we do not understand ourselves. We just know what is right, and we do it. Even when it hurts. Even when it costs us everything. The negotiations lasted a full week. The terms were straightforward. but every word had to be chosen carefully. The wrong phrase could restart the war. The Dominion agreed to withdraw from assembly space forever. They would release all prisoners from the civilizations they had conquered. They would pay reparations to the species they had destroyed. Though everyone knew that no amount of resources could bring back the dead, in exchange, they would be allowed to leave. Vexthal protested this point loudly. They killed billions of beings across a dozen civilizations. They tried to destroy us. They should face justice. Justice would require destroying their remaining fleet, Catherine said calmly. That would cost more human lives. The people who committed those crimes are dead. Kethvos is dead. His commanders are dead. These soldiers were following orders, just like ours were. They do not deserve mercy. Maybe not. But we are not giving them mercy for their sake. We are doing it for ours. Catherine looked at Vethra, who sat very still on the other side of the table. The war is over. More killing will not bring back the dead. It will only create new dead. Vexthal wanted to argue more, but he could see that Catherine would not change her mind. And somewhere deep inside, in a place he did not like to examine, he knew she was right. The treaty was signed on the 7th day. Vethra pressed her hand against the document, leaving a print in a color that meant acceptance in her culture. Catherine signed with an old-fashioned pen, same pen her father had used to sign Earth's first interstellar trade agreement. Go home, Catherine told Vethra when it was done. Tell your people what happened here. Tell them that the galaxy is not as helpless as they believed. And tell them that if they ever return, we will be waiting. Vethra nodded slowly. Your species is strange, Ambassador. You have the power to destroy us, yet you let us leave. You suffered greatly, yet you do not seek revenge. I do not know if you are wise or foolish. Neither do we, Catherine admitted. Ask us again in 1,000 years. The Dominion fleet departed the next day. 83 ships, all that remained of their great armada, limped back toward their own space. They would never return. Their empire, built on conquest, would eventually collapse as the species they had enslaved rose up against them. But that was a story for another time. The assembly held a ceremony to honor the human dead. It was the first time in 12,000 years that they had honored warriors. The great chamber was packed with delegates from every species. Flowers from 100 worlds covered the speaking platform. Lights dimmed to simulate a sunset, as humans liked sunsets, and someone had thought it would be appropriate. Admiral Patricia Quinn attended in a hover chair. Her arm had been replaced with a mechanical one, but she was still recovering from her other wounds. She wore her dress uniform with new medals, awards that humanity had created specifically for this war because they had never needed them. Before Vexthal gave a long speech. He talked about sacrifice and courage and the bonds between species. He apologized for how the assembly had treated humanity. He promised that things would be different now. When he finished, Quinn was invited to respond. She struggled to her feet, pushing away officers who tried to help her, and stood on her own before the assembly. My people have an old saying, she said. Her voice was rough from exhaustion and emotion. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. 23,000 humans did that over the past months. They died for species they had never met, for worlds they would never see, for people who had called them monsters. She paused, looking around the chamber at beings she had fought to protect. Many of them were crying. The Velith had turned colors that meant profound grief. The Falari were silent, their usual grace replaced by stillness. Do not thank us, Quinn continued. Do not honor us. Just remember. Remember that when you looked at us and saw predators, we looked at you and saw friends. Remember that the next time you judge someone by what they are instead of what they do. She stepped back from the podium. Her legs were shaking, but she refused to show weakness. These people needed to see strength. They needed to believe that humanity was still standing. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the assembly began to applaud. Not the polite acknowledgement of a diplomatic speech, but something deeper. Something real? Delegate Kiranash of the Falari rose from her seat and walked to where Quinn stood. Without saying a word, She placed her hand over her heart in the Falari gesture of deepest respect. One by one, other delegates did the same. The Vlith, the Marathi, species that had feared humans for 11 years, now showed them honor. Vextel was the last to rise. He walked to Quinn and performed a formal bow, bending all 6 arms in a gesture that his species reserved for the most revered elders. "We were wrong about you," he said quietly. "Forgive us." Quinn looked at the Chancellor, who had confined her people to the edges of space, who had watched them like criminals, who had doubted them until the very end. "Already done," she said. "Already done." 3 months after the war ended, humanity was granted full membership in the Galactic Assembly. The vote was unanimous. Every species that had once feared humans now welcomed them as equals. Ambassador Catherine Cole gave her acceptance speech from the same platform where she had first introduced herself. 14 years earlier. The chamber was completely full, every section packed, every delegate present. Cameras broadcast her words to 17 homeworlds. Catherine looked out at the audience and remembered the fear she had seen in their eyes the first time she stood here. That fear was gone now. In its place was something else. Trust, gratitude, hope. "When we first came to this chamber," she began, "you saw us as predators, dangerous, unpredictable, something to be controlled and contained. You were not entirely wrong. We are all of those things. We evolved on a world where everything wanted to eat us. We survived by being better at violence than anything else." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But that is not all we are. We are also the species that tamed wolves and made them into companions. We are the species that crossed oceans in tiny wooden boats because we wanted to see what was on the other side. We are the species that looked at the stars and decided to visit them, even though the journey would take generations." Delegate Kieran Ash was crying. She did not try to hide her tears. Other delegates showed emotion in their own ways. The Velith had turned colors that meant deep feeling. The Marathi sat perfectly still, which was their species' expression of profound respect. "You called us monsters," Catherine continued, "and maybe you were right. But monsters can also be friends. They can stand watch while you sleep. They can fight the things that frighten you. They can love you, even when you do not love them back." She straightened her shoulders and looked directly at Vextel. "Today, humanity joins the Assembly, not as observers, not as probationary members, but as full partners. We accept this honor in the name of everyone who fought and died to earn it." Catherine's expression grew serious. "But I want to make one thing clear. To everyone in this chamber, and everyone watching across the galaxy, the Assembly's era of pure peace is over. It ended the moment the Dominion crossed your borders. What comes next must be something different." She stepped forward, her voice rising. Not the peace of innocence. The peace of strength. The chamber went quiet. Delegates exchanged uncertain looks. This was not the gentle acceptance speech they had expected. The Dominion will not return. But others will. The universe is vast, and not everyone in it shares our values. There are species out there who see this assembly as a meal waiting to be eaten. They will come eventually. And when they do, you must be ready. Catherine turned to address every section of the chamber. Humanity cannot protect you forever. We cannot be your guardians while you remain helpless. If you want peace to last, you must learn to defend it yourselves. Not alone. Never alone. But alongside us, as partners and allies. She looked at Vextel one last time. The old peace is over, but a new one can begin. Stronger, more honest. Built not on the absence of conflict, but on the willingness to face it together. She stepped back from the speaking platform. Humanity is ready. The question is whether you are. The chamber erupted in discussion. Some delegates embraced the call immediately. They had seen what humans could do and wanted that strength for themselves. Others resisted, clinging to the comfortable belief that peace could exist without the ability to enforce it. The debate would continue for months. Every species had to make its own choice. But slowly, one by one, they came around to Catherine's view. The Assembly created its first joint military command. With human advisors at every level, Shipyards that had only built trading vessels began producing warships. Schools that had taught only science and commerce now offered courses in strategy and defense. Human instructors arrived on 17 worlds to train soldiers. They were patient teachers, these veterans of Earth's endless conflicts. They shared knowledge that their species had paid for in blood over thousands of years. Admiral Quinn retired from active duty and took a position at the new Assembly Military Academy. She taught tactics and leadership, and her students came from every species in the Assembly. They learned to fight. More importantly, they learned why fighting mattered. Commander Hayes's daughter, Laura, grew up to become an ambassador. She carried her father's memory with her to every negotiation, never forgetting that peace was purchased with lives. Lieutenant Marsh's parents received a medal for their son's sacrifice. They donated it to a museum on Earth, where it sat next to artifacts from every war humanity had ever fought. Thousands of people came to see it each year, to remember the young officer who had given everything to protect strangers, Catherine. Cole lived to see the first generation of non-human soldiers graduate from human military academies. She attended the ceremony, watching young Velith and Falari and even Marathi accept their commissions. They stood straight and proud, their eyes forward, ready to defend their homes. She died peacefully at 93, surrounded by friends from 6 different species. In her final hours, she talked about her nephews, about Commander Hayes and Lieutenant Marsh, about all the humans who had died in a war that never should have happened. "Tell them we remember," she whispered near the end. "Tell them we will always remember." On her grave marker, by her own request, they carved a simple phrase in 17 languages. "Here lies Catherine." Cole. She stood between the light and the darkness. She was human. Years passed, decades, centuries. The assembly grew stronger. New species joined, protected by a military that could actually defend them. The galaxy became safer, though it was never truly safe. Nothing was ever truly safe, but the peace held. Not because the universe had become kind. It had not. There were still predators out there, still empires that dreamed of conquest, still threats that emerged from the darkness between stars. The peace held because the assembly had learned the lesson humanity taught them. Peace was not the absence of enemies. Peace was the strength to defeat them. Peace was the willingness to sacrifice, to fight, to die for something bigger than yourself. The humans had shown them the way. 23,000 humans, whose names were carved on a memorial that stretched for miles across a field on Earth. 23,000 humans who had looked at the galaxy's fear and answered with courage. They were not saints. They were not perfect. They were predators, just as the assembly had always known. But they were predators who had chosen to protect instead of hunt, to build instead of destroy, to love instead of hate. And that, in the end, made all the difference. The old peace was over, but the new peace, the human peace, would last for 10 nows.